Hello, my name is Arlindo Chagas, and welcome to the Encounter of Fear channel. Before we begin, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more chilling stories. My name is John, and my family owns a farm in the countryside, surrounded by vast cornfields. When I was 16, something strange started to happen. Every night, we heard whispers coming from the cornfield. At first we thought it was just animals rustling through the stalks, but soon the whispers began to form words, calling my name. It all started one warm summer evening. The sun had just set, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple. I was sitting on the porch enjoying the cool breeze when I first heard it. "John," a soft, eerie whisper carried by the wind. I stood up, peering into the cornfield, but saw nothing unusual. I shrugged it off as my imagination and went inside. The next few nights, the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. My parents and younger sister, Emily, couldn't hear them, which only added to my unease. Determined to prove I wasn't losing my mind, I decided to investigate. One night, armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the cornfield. The tall stalks towered over me, creating an almost impenetrable wall. The further I walked, the quieter the world around me became. Even the crickets and nocturnal creatures seemed to avoid this place. As I moved deeper into the field, the whispers grew louder, now a chorus of urgent voices. "June, come closer." Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into complete darkness. Panic set in, and I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to get it to work. That's when I felt it, a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but saw nothing but darkness. I could hear my own breath, ragged and terrified. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing just a few feet away, barely visible in the moonlight. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to blend into the darkness around it. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Joan, come with us." Frozen in fear, I couldn't move. The shadow began to glide toward me, its movements unnaturally smooth and fluid. Desperate to escape, I turned and ran, crashing through the corn, my heart racing. The whispers followed me, growing fainter as I neared the edge of the field. I burst out of the cornfield, collapsing onto the grass, gasping for breath. Back at the house, I tried to explain what had happened, but my parents dismissed it as a bad dream. Only Emily seemed to believe me, her wide eyes filled with fear. "John, I heard them too," she whispered. "They called my name." Over the next few days, I tried to avoid the cornfield, but the whispers continued, now calling both my name and Emily's. We were both terrified, knowing that whatever was out there hadn't given up. One evening, we decided to face our fears together, armed with flashlights and holding hands. Emily and I ventured into the cornfield. As we walked, the whispers surrounded us, growing louder and more frantic. "June, Emily, come closer." The shadowy figure appeared again, this time accompanied by several others, their forms barely distinguishable from the darkness. We held our ground, determined not to run this time. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figures didn't answer, but the whispers changed, becoming a mournful chant. "Help us, free us." Emily and I exchanged a look, realizing that these weren't just malevolent spirits. They were trapped, and they wanted our help. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I asked, "How can we free you?" The shadowy figure closest to us extended a hand, pointing to the heart of the cornfield. "There," the whisper said. "Destroy it." With trembling hands, Emily and I followed the direction indicated by the shadow. Deep in the cornfield, we found an old, decrepit scarecrow, its eyes black and empty. It radiated a palpable sense of dread, and we knew it was the source of the whispers. Using all our strength, we tore the scarecrow down, ripping it apart. As we did, the whispers grew louder, reaching a deafening crescendo before suddenly stopping. The shadowy figures began to fade, their forms dissipating into the night. The air around us grew warmer, and for the first time in weeks, the cornfield was silent. Exhausted but relieved, Emily and I returned home. The whispers never returned, and the sense of foreboding that had hung over our farm lifted. Though we never spoke of it again, we both knew that something dark and sinister had been banished from our lives that night. Even now, years later, I can't look at a cornfield without remembering that terrifying summer. The shadows, the whispers, and the scarecrow that held them all captive are forever etched in my memory. And I know that no matter where I go, I'll always feel their presence lurking just out of sight, a reminder of the horrors we faced and overcame. My name is Maria, and this is a story that has haunted me for years. It happened on my grandparents' farm, a place that always felt like a second home to me. The farm was vast, with endless fields of wheat and corn, and in the middle of one of those fields stood an old scarecrow. Its presence always unsettled me, but my grandparents insisted it was just my imagination. It was late autumn, and the days were getting shorter. One evening, after dinner, my grandparents went to bed early, leaving me alone to finish my homework. As the night grew darker, a strange feeling of unease settled over me. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Around midnight, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the field. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the footsteps were steady and deliberate. Curiosity and fear battled within me, and eventually, curiosity won. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. The cold night air sent shivers down my spine as I made my way toward the field. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the farm in an eerie dim light. The footsteps continued, leading me deeper into the field. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tall, rustling stalks of wheat. As I approached the scarecrow, my heart pounded in my chest. The scarecrow was old and weathered, with tattered clothes and a head made from a burlap sack. Its button eyes seemed to glint malevolently in the flashlight's beam. I stood there, frozen in fear, watching it sway slightly in the breeze. Suddenly, the scarecrow's head jerked toward me. I gasped, stumbling backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, coming from all directions now. My pulse raced, and I turned to run, but something stopped me. A voice, low and raspy, emanating from the scarecrow. "Maria," it whispered, sending chills down my spine. "Help me." I wanted to scream, to run back to the safety of the farmhouse, but my legs felt like lead. The scarecrow began to move, its limbs creaking and groaning as it stepped down from its post. It walked toward me with a stiff, unnatural gait, and I could see now that its burlap head was slowly twisting and changing, forming a grotesque, almost human face. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I backed away, but the scarecrow reached out, its straw-stuffed hand grabbing my arm. The touch was cold and lifeless, but the grip was strong. "Help me," it repeated, its voice more insistent. What do you want?" I stammered, barely able to form the words. The scarecrow's eyes seemed to bore into mine, filled with an ancient sorrow. "Release me," it whispered. "Set me free." In my terror, I remembered the old stories my grandmother used to tell me. about spirits trapped in objects, cursed to remain bound until someone brave enough freed them. Summoning all the courage I could muster, I nodded. How? I asked, my voice trembling. The scarecrow gestured toward its chest. Burn it, it said. Burn the heart. With shaking hands, I pulled a lighter from my pocket. I didn't remember bringing it with me, but there it was, as if fate had placed it in my hands. The scarecrow watched me, its expression unreadable. I flicked the lighter, the small flame casting flickering shadows across the field. Taking a deep breath, I moved closer to the scarecrow. Its chest was a mass of straw and cloth, but in the center, I saw something dark and pulsing, a heart, twisted and gnarled. I held the flame to it, and as the fire caught, the scarecrow let out a soul-wrenching scream. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the scarecrow in flames. I stumbled back, watching in horror and awe as it burned. The scream echoed through the night, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire world held its breath. Then, with a final, agonized cry, the scarecrow crumbled to ash, and the field fell silent. The footsteps ceased, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the farm lifted. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the smoldering remains of the scarecrow. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with a lingering fear. I knew that whatever curse had been lifted, the memory of that night would haunt me forever. I returned to the farmhouse, locking the door behind me. My grandparents never believed my story, but I knew the truth. The scarecrow had been alive, cursed and trapped, and I had freed it. Even now, years later, the memory of its voice and the terror of that night remain vivid in my mind. Every time I see a scarecrow, I feel a shiver of fear, a reminder of the living nightmare I faced and the courage it took to overcome it. My name is Carlos, and this is the story of the abandoned house on my farm, a story that still haunts my dreams. I bought the farm a few years ago, hoping for a quiet life away from the chaos of the city. The property was beautiful, with rolling fields and dense woods. But there was one thing that always seemed out of place: an old, decrepit house at the edge of the property. The previous owners had warned me not to enter it, but they never explained why. For the first few months I avoided the house, content to focus on restoring the rest of the farm. But my curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. What secrets did the house hold? Why had it been abandoned for so long? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, I decided to find out. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I made my way to the house. The air grew colder as I approached, and an eerie silence settled over the area. The front door creaked open with a loud groan, as if protesting my intrusion. The inside was dark and dusty, with cobwebs hanging from every corner. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and the smell of mold and decay filled the air. As I explored the ground floor, I found nothing but old furniture and broken windows. The place seemed untouched, yet something felt off. It was as if the house was alive, watching my every move. I found an old journal on a dusty table, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were written in a shaky hand, detailing the previous owner's descent into madness. He spoke of voices in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and a presence that haunted his every step. Chilled to the bone, I decided to leave, but something compelled me to go upstairs. The stairs creaked and groaned under my weight, and with each step, the air grew colder. At the top of the stairs, I found a long hallway with several closed doors. The whisper started then, soft at first, then growing louder. They seemed to come from behind one of the doors. Hard pounding, I approached the door at the end of the hallway. The whispers grew more frantic, almost pleading. With a trembling hand, I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. Inside was a small bedroom, empty except for a single, old-fashioned rocking chair. It rocked slowly back and forth, as if moved by an unseen hand. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stepped into the room. The whispers stopped abruptly, and an oppressive silence filled the air. I shone my flashlight around the room, but there was nothing out of the ordinary until I saw the closet door. It was slightly ajar, and something about it filled me with dread. I approached the closet, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I had to know. With a deep breath, I pulled the door open. Inside was darkness, an abyss that seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. I stepped back, my heart racing, when suddenly a cold hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The rocking chair had stopped moving and the whispers had returned, now filled with anger. "Get out," they hissed, the words chilling me to the core. "Leave this place." Panicked, I ran out of the room, down the hallway, and back down the stairs. The house seemed to come alive around me, the walls closing in, the air growing colder and thicker. I burst through the front door and didn't stop running until I reached my own house. Breathless and terrified, I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the floor. My mind raced with what I had seen and felt. The house was more than just abandoned. It was cursed. The journal, the whispers, the cold hand, all signs of a malevolent presence. The next day, I gathered the courage to return to the old house, this time with the intention of sealing it off for good. As I approached, I saw that the front door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I steeled myself and entered one last time. The atmosphere was even more oppressive in the daylight. I made my way back to the bedroom with the rocking chair and the closet. The closet door was now fully open, revealing nothing but darkness. I placed a heavy chain and padlock on the closet door, hoping to trap whatever was inside. As I did, the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, but I didn't stop. I locked the closet and quickly exited the house. That evening, I boarded up all the windows and doors, hoping to seal the evil within. The house remained silent, but I could still feel its presence, watching, waiting. The farm returned to its peaceful routine, but I never forgot the terror of that night. Even now, the memory haunts me. The abandoned house stands as a grim reminder of the darkness that lurks just out of sight. I warn anyone who comes near to stay away, to leave the past buried. For there are some places where the shadows never truly fade, and the whispers never truly die. My name is Miguel, and I manage a ranch that has been in my family for generations. Our land is vast, with rolling hills and dense woods, perfect for grazing cattle. But there is a section of the ranch that everyone avoids, an old, overgrown pasture where strange things happen. It is said that this pasture is haunted by the spirits of a long-lost herd. It all began one stormy night. I was in the barn, securing everything against the wind and rain, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of cattle lowing in the distance. At first I thought it was just our herd reacting to the storm, but when I went to check on them, I found them huddled together, silent and still. The sounds were coming from the old pasture. Despite the rain lashing against my face and the wind howling in my ears, I decided to investigate. With a lantern in hand, I made my way to the abandoned pasture. The fence that once enclosed it was broken and covered in ivy, the gate hanging off its hinges. As I entered, the air grew colder, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The pasture was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of the phantom herd. The lantern's light cast long, flickering shadows on the ground, and the rain created a mist that seemed to dance around me. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached the center of the pasture. There, standing in the mist, was a ghostly herd of cattle. Their forms were translucent, shimmering in the lantern's light. They moved slowly, grazing on grass that wasn't there. I stood frozen, unable to believe my eyes. The herd seemed peaceful, but there was an underlying sense of sorrow that hung in the air. As I watched, a figure appeared among the cattle, a ghostly cowboy, his features obscured by the mist. He looked at me with hollow eyes, filled with a sadness that pierced my soul. "Help us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "We are lost." I wanted to run, but something in his eyes held me in place. "How can I help?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Find our resting place," he replied. "We cannot move on until we are at peace." With that, the herd began to fade, the mist swallowing them up until there was nothing left but the sound of the rain. I stood there, drenched and shaking, my mind racing with what I had seen. Determined to help, I spent the next few days researching the history of the ranch. I discovered that many years ago, a terrible storm had swept through the area, causing a stampede that led the herd over a cliff at the edge of the property. The bodies of the cattle and their cowboy had never been recovered, and it was said that their spirits wandered the pasture, unable to find rest. Armed with this knowledge, I set out to find the cliff. It was hidden deep within the woods, a sheer drop into a ravine below. As I stood at the edge, the wind picked up, carrying the mournful sound of the phantom herd. I knew what I had to do. Gathering a few ranch hands, we spent the next week carefully excavating the area at the base of the cliff. It was a grim task, but eventually we found the remains of the cattle and their cowboy. We gathered the bones and laid them to rest in a proper burial site on the ranch, marking it with a simple wooden cross. That night, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I returned to the old pasture. The air was still and silent, and for a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream. But then, out of the mist, the ghostly herd appeared once more. They moved toward the burial site, the cowboy leading them. He turned to me, his hollow eyes now filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "We are at peace." The herd began to fade, their forms dissolving into the mist. The cowboy tipped his hat to me, a final gesture of thanks, before he too vanished. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling that had hung over the pasture lifted. In the days that followed, the ranch returned to its normal routine. The old pasture, once a place of fear and sorrow, became a peaceful spot where the grass grew greener and the sun seemed to shine a little brighter. I often visit the burial site, a reminder of the phantom herd and the cowboy who found peace at last. Even now, years later, the memory of that night remains vivid. The ghostly herd, the sorrowful cowboy, and the sense of duty to help them find rest. All of it has left an indelible mark on my soul. I know that the spirits of the lost herd are finally at peace, and the ranch is a better place because of it. My name is Felipe, and my family has owned a sprawling orchard for generations. The apple trees, with their gnarled branches and lush foliage, stretch out as far as the eye can see. It's a place that always felt magical to me as a child, but as I grew older, I started hearing whispers about a dark presence that haunted a specific section of the orchard, a place we called the Dead Zone. The Dead Zone was a part of the orchard where the trees bore no fruit and the ground was barren. My grandfather used to warn us never to go near it, saying that something evil lived there. I never believed him until the summer of my 23rd year when I decided to investigate the Dead Zone for myself. One late afternoon, with the sun casting long shadows across the orchard, I made my way toward the Dead Zone. The air grew colder as I approached, and an unnatural silence enveloped the area. No birds sang, and even the insects seemed to avoid it. The ground was dry and cracked, and the trees were twisted and lifeless. As I ventured deeper, I felt a sense of foreboding, as if I were being watched. I noticed a peculiar tree at the center of the Dead Zone, larger than the others, with an almost human-like shape to its trunk and branches. Intrigued, I approached it. The closer I got, the stronger the sense of dread became. When I reached the tree, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The bark was covered in deep, jagged scars, as if something had clawed at it desperately. Suddenly, the wind picked up, whispering through the branches in a language I couldn't understand. I stepped back, my heart racing, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my pocket knife and carved a small mark into the bark. The moment the blade touched the tree, a piercing scream erupted from the ground, and the earth beneath me began to tremble. I stumbled back, dropping my knife, as the tree seemed to come alive, its branches writhing like snakes. The air grew colder, and a dense fog rolled in, obscuring my vision. I tried to run, but the fog was disorienting. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The screams grew louder, echoing in my ears, and I felt something brush against my leg. Looking down, I saw skeletal hands emerging from the ground, grasping at my ankles. I kicked and struggled, my panic rising, but more hands appeared, pulling me down. Just when I thought I would be dragged into the earth, I heard a voice, soft yet commanding. "Leave him be," it said. The hands released me, and the fog began to lift. Through the thinning mist, I saw the figure of an old woman, her face lined with age and wisdom. She wore a tattered shawl and carried a gnarled staff. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I am the guardian of this place," she replied. "You should not have come here." I didn't mean any harm," I stammered. "I just wanted to know why this place is like this." The old woman sighed, her eyes filled with sorrow. "This land is cursed," she said. "Many years ago, a terrible event took place here. A family was wrongfully accused of witchcraft and hanged from this very tree. Their spirits cannot rest, and their anger taints the land." I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke. "Is there a way to lift the curse?" I asked. The old woman nodded. "The spirits must be appeased. You must find the remains of the family and give them a proper burial. Only then will the land be cleansed." Determined to help, I asked her where I could find the remains. She pointed to a spot near the tree where the ground was particularly barren. "Dig there," she said, "but be warned, the spirits will not make it easy for you." With the old woman's guidance, I returned to the farmhouse and gathered a shovel and lantern. Night had fallen by the time I returned to the Dead Zone, and the place was even more eerie in the darkness. I set to work, digging in the spot she had indicated. As I dug, the wind howled around me, and I could hear whispers in the darkness, growing louder and more insistent. Shadows flickered at the edge of the lantern's light, and I felt the eyes of unseen watchers on me. My shovel struck something hard, and I uncovered the skeletal remains of a family, their bones tangled together in a mass grave. The moment I exposed the bones, a cold hand grasped my shoulder. I spun around to see a ghostly figure, its eyes hollow and filled with pain. "Release us," it whispered. Swallowing my fear, I nodded. "I will," I promised. I gently gathered the bones and carried them to a nearby clearing, where I dug a new grave. As I laid the bones to rest, I recited a prayer for their souls. The wind died down and the whispers ceased. A sense of peace settled over the dead zone, and I felt a warmth spread through me. The old woman appeared beside me, her expression one of gratitude. "You have done a great deed," she said. "The spirits can now rest, and the land will heal." As she faded into the night, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The dead zone, once a place of fear and sorrow, would now become part of the orchard again. The next day, I noticed that the trees in the area were starting to bloom, their leaves greener and healthier than ever before. The memory of that night remains with me, a reminder of the darkness that once haunted our orchard and the spirits that found peace at last. I often visit the new grave, offering prayers and thanks for the old woman's guidance. The orchard is a better place now, and I am grateful for the opportunity to set things right.